We have rewritten the Right Kit 3 times. We're on the 3rd version. And that means different interfaces, different entities, different flows. And, as I mentioned earlier, my wife thinks I'm a little hard on myself. I don't know. I just think it's normal. But regardless, you wake up and you look at the thing, you show it to some people. And for anybody out there who's trying to launch their own SaaS, their own web business, it's a fascinating process. And it is definitely not for the faint of heart.
Welcome to The Growth Stack, the show where we explore how great companies grow smarter and faster through better technology and talent. Today, I'm joined by Liz Dubelman and Jesse Kanner, co-founders of The Right Kit, a platform that gives authors the training and tools they need to launch and promote their books. Liz and Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lael.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
So I like to start each one of these episodes of the guest giving a background so the audience knows who we're talking to. So Liz, why don't you give a little background about yourself?
Okay. I started out in film and television in New York. I was the second woman in the camera union. So I was very technically oriented, but doing machine work, not so much digital work. And then when I moved out to California, which is where I am now, it was no fun to be in the movie business because it's a company town. And there was no cinematic community. There was nothing special about being in the movie business. And a friend of mine showed me the internet. And this was the internet before there were browsers. I actually remember when the browsers came in. And that same friend introduced me to Jesse. And my husband was working with magazines. He's a journalist, a political satirist. And he introduced me to a lot of magazines. And all the magazines knew that they had digital rights. And they wanted to be online, but they didn't know how to do it. So I had a company called The Answer, and I would go around to all of these magazines and put them online. And at that time, you had to hand HTML every page, and it was a real pain in the ass. But then things progressed really quickly, and I got a job working at News Corp. I was creative director of News Corp MCI, and Jesse and I worked together there. And that was amazing because they had all these different projects. They had the X-Files and the Simpsons, and they knew that they wanted to do something with them, put them online in some way, but they didn't know how. So we would spend hours and hours brainstorming. And Jesse, we'd go to Jesse and say, how do we do this?
Well, yeah, and it was interesting because at that time there was no bandwidth. People had 6K modems, so it took a lot of extra thought. Since we were introducing a new medium to an existing passionate audience, we didn't want bad looks, right? Because it was kind of high stakes. And it was very interesting. It really formed a foundation for how I think Liz and I think about how technology is supposed to perform for just regular people.
It was a lot of Flash. I don't know if you remember Flash, but there was a lot of Flash involved. A lot of XY, a lot of compressing things. Even now, things are compressed. When your television, when you're streaming, whatever you're streaming, Netflix or something, they're always compressing either the sound or the picture. So we still think that way.
So then, Jesse, can you give a little background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Los Angeles. Actually, I was thinking about it this morning. My parents, my mother and my father, they met at Cooper Union in the 50s. And my father was an engineering major, and my mother was an art major. And I kind of realized that kind of dichotomy or that balance between technology and art is just something I grew up around. And in fact, when I went to college, I studied computer music, and this was in the late 80s. So we were learning how to create music with computers, and it was just as MIDI was just getting invented. So that became kind of my path, the foundational path. And from there, I graduated, became a recording engineer in the LA studio scene, and I worked for Jackson Browne and Kenny Rogers and a bunch of people at their studios. And, I got to see big time media production, when you're burning through $1,000 an hour. Much Liz also obviously had that experience with film where you're sitting there and you've got a room full of incredibly talented men and women, and you have to make sure things are running right, and you have to have your ducks in a row. So I guess in a way, I've internalized that sense of pressure just by habit, kind of with everything that I do. And it doesn't even feel uncomfortable to me. It's sort of not to overstate the case, I don't, it's a bit like a performance athlete where you kind of have one speed, you know? So then, yeah, I was doing records and mixing and recording some records, some of which you may have heard of. And, yeah, I met Liz and I had the computer skills from college, and yeah, it became evident to me that there were sort of there were a bunch of refugees coming from different media traditions. Like Liz and I worked with a guy named Peter Duke, who was a fashion photographer, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of my friends were doing HTML. I decided to learn how to write code, or to kind of leverage my code writing to learn Perl and to understand how to actually make the back end of these things work. Because as Liz was saying, you had to hand code a bunch of HTML to get some kind of an experience, but it ran out of steam very quickly unless there was some kind of interactivity. So yeah, fast forward, then I started making software, managing software teams, working at News Corporation and then at Disney, and I did contracting for Google, and just a kind of a gamut of different media companies. And yeah, then Liz and I started having coffee, and then we started scheming kind of what we really wanted to do. And that's kind of how the Right Kit started.
So yeah, there's so much of what you guys said that is just so fascinating to me. Just you talked about in the 80s when MIDI was getting started. And I remember at that time, I think I was in 6th grade in elementary school, and someone came in with like a synthesizer. And at that point, that was the coolest thing that, I haven't thought about that in probably, I don't know, 35 years or whatever it's been.
Mm.
But I remember that as so magical. And the progression of technology from that point to today, and that you were there, I couldn't imagine what you guys have experienced in those early days. How technology, you're trying to use it, but you don't have the tools that we have today. I could go on. I'm super fascinated, but I want to hear so you guys are sitting around having discussions. What led you to founding the Right Kit?
Well, I had been working with authors for a long time because I saw the media industry and I saw the low-hanging fruit was publishing. They needed the most help with their digital rights. The music business needs help, but they have their own things. They're like gamblers, a small investment for a big possible return. Movie business was too complicated, but I really like telling stories, and I want to help people get their stories out because I think that stories are the human condition. If I have a story that makes you feel a little less lonely, that's gold.
Yeah.
So Jesse and I talked about what is the aspect that's the hardest of being an author. Writing is hard, but getting it out, cutting through all the noise, and getting to people who are going to use their leisure time to watch Netflix or to listen to a song or to go to a concert or to scroll on TikTok. How do we cut through that noise? How do we make that marketing experience for authors who are very sensitive usually? How do we make that experience better for them? And so we started meeting and talking about it, talking to other authors, to publishers, and really Jesse came up with like a great set of tools, and we together did a bunch of lessons and made it so not gamified exactly, but just made it easy for authors to
Well,
be able to market.
yeah. And it was not, it was a really great process, this back and forth that Liz is talking about, because I had been doing fairly wide variety of different kinds of website and online media for different clients. But Liz sensitized me to this market, this cohort of authors. And so then I basically retooled my practice and I went after authors specifically. And, and technically the requirements were fairly simple as to making software, but the psychic requirements, the sense of success, how do you know you're doing the right thing? That actually was an interesting challenge for me. And that's something that Liz has, really served as a mentor for me to sensitize what it's like to be an author. And, when I left recording engineering, before I booted my software practice, I had about a half a year phase where I really wanted to be a writer, and that was important to me. And I was reading Flannery O'Connor and Raymond Carver and John Fonte and all these great books. And I just felt like, I live in Los Angeles. It's a real writer's culture here, but I just wasn't able to do it. But I was able to ignite the passion for wanting to do it. And then again, meeting with Liz, it began to reignite. And then I was able to discern it, in other people. And that's when we started, essentially, Liz and I started building a series of websites. Together, we had a practice where Liz would handle the marketing for the books. And, Liz is being modest, but I should mention that, she's worked with some pretty heavyweight authors. She's worked with David Foster Wallace and Carrie Fisher and a bunch of other people. So she's worked the gamut of authors, and she really understands how they tick. And then I learned things about the industry. And that's when I became obsessed or focused on, I want to do this great. Like, I want an easy, effective web presence for authors. And how do we rethink that? How do we do that?
Sorry for the quick interruption, but if you want to contact the guest, check the description for the best way to contact them. And if you are interested in hiring nearshore software development contractors, or you are interested in using AI to improve any function of your business, you can go to the link right here to set up a meeting to discuss your needs. Now back to the episode. So if you have an author like, I'm not a big reader, but one series of books that I got into was, I think my first was like the Da Vinci Code in recent time. And that was before we had smartphones with us all the time. So I was in Europe and I was going to be on some train rides and I needed something to entertain myself. The iPads, the iPhone, they didn't exist at that time. So what do you do for 6 hours? And so I had the Da Vinci Code and I was really fascinated by it. And then from there I read, because I liked Dan Brown, I went to some of his other books. But Dan Brown is, and some of the authors that you have mentioned are big authors that I'm guessing have a different experience as an author trying to market books than John Smith, who just writes his first book. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between them and how the Right Kit is trying to help the smaller author?
Yes. And also, yes, Dan Brown has a different experience, but it's not that different.
Okay.
I published a book with a St. Martin's Press, which is a big author press, and I had the same experience. I was assigned a marketer and a PR person, but I needed to court them. I needed to become friends with them, and I needed to tell them exactly what to do. So it wasn't that different. The only difference really is they buy a lot more ads, but ads don't necessarily sell books. I mean, Dan Brown, it'll sell a book for because we know his name. We've mentioned it like 10 times already. So that's the point. The point is you want people mentioning your name and your book. I want to be able to say to someone, I just wrote this amazing book and it's going to help you figure out your family. Or I want to say to my friend, I just read this great book and, it gave me words to feelings that I have. So it's not that different. It's just a matter of just getting the word out there and getting it out as comfortably as possible, because being an art, you don't go into writing because you want to be a marketer. You go into writing because you want to write. So what is the way to market? By just continuing to write. And that's what we're hoping that the Right Kit does, is it just gives you a way to frame the marketing so it's just more writing and more creative expression.
So walk me through this a little bit more. I'm just wrote a book, or I'm in the process of writing a book, and I already know that I'm going to need to market this in some way. This is my first book. I have no history. So I am out there looking for ways to market this, and I come across the Right Kit. What are you guys going to do for me to help me market this book, since I don't have these big publishers giving me the actual people to market it for me?
First of all, congratulations. I'm writing a book. That is the most important thing. I mean, you need
I won't
to
be, but
really,
let's pretend.
You need to be congratulated for getting those words out. It's really hard and it's really
Yeah,
lonely and you feel great when it's over, but it's like going to the gym. It's,
Sure.
something
Yeah.
that you just have to do. The next thing we do is we want to give you a digital home, which would be your website. I think of it, often use this term, I think of it as the presidential library. It's where you get control of what your digital rights are and how you want to express yourself, how you want to be known in the world. And so we do a very thorough job of putting together a website with everything that you would possibly need. We hope. And go ahead, Jesse. Did you want to say
yeah,
something?
well, yeah, and this is in the discovery process. To actually make this digital experience, we started doing inventories and bullet points and whiteboards, and we quickly realized in preparation to create this library, this central repository, it actually winds up giving you a leverage point for all the activities that take place throughout the campaign of your book, meaning that you are going to have to solicit appearances on podcasts and radio shows and at the local, YMCA, at the bookstore. And the people who book these appearances, they need to very quickly discern who you are, what you're about,
Yeah.
is what you've written align with their expected audience. And this is something that Liz has helped people with, that it's really stressful to have to go to your hard drive or go into your Google Cloud and find the version. Is it the right version of your bio? And then, oh, I need a short version. And then, oh, well, we just step you through the process of preparing the assets. And, look, there are a lot of touch points to prepare yourself, but there aren't that many. And they're pretty well understood, right? It's just a list of maybe 15 or 20 things. So we try to make the software experience wizard driven, experiential, so that hey, I'm accomplishing things. I've got these things in my bucket. I'm like at the market. I'm putting them in my cart. I got my kit, and now I can go off on my hike and I can do what I got to do.
And also, it's important that you keep writing. And so you shouldn't spend more than 20 minutes a day marketing, because if you spend more than that, then somehow you're eating into your creative time or your family time or the time into that you need to rest and relax. So after you put your website together, we step you through it very easily. And from that, the software pulls together your press kit, which is a lovely thing. And then, we help you set up your newsletter, because your newsletter is like the invitation to your housewarming, which is your website. And then we have a series of sprints, and sprints are short exercises. They're little lectures, very, very short lectures, and then a little bit of exercises that you can do, and everything furthers the goal of marketing your book. So, for example, finding a comparable book. That's probably one of the most important things you can do. So you find a comparable book, and then you can follow what their keywords are, what their categories
Yeah.
are, what you can write a summary of their book probably easier than you can write a summary of your own book. So you write the summary of the book, and then you figure out what's different about my book. How is my book different? That becomes part of your marketing materials. And it also reminds you all to talk about what you're doing, because that's really what it's all about. You talk about the book that I just wrote or the book I just read. And that's really important. And you will really want to keep, we call it your writer ecosystem. So you want to keep those people on a list that's close to you. And what I do is every Friday, I go through all of my emails, my chats, and my texts, and I see, who do I need to put on my list of people that I've actually had real conversations with. Usually it's not the Spectrum guy who came to fix my internet, but sometimes it is. If he gave me his email address, and we keep those on a list for you too. So we're really keeping you organized and moving forward all the time.
Okay. Now you guys have been around for 4-ish years or so.
Yeah, about that.
And how are people, again, I'm this new author, let's pretend. And how am I finding you? Am I finding you through some Google search? Is that how I come across you? Or
you can find
Yeah.
us through Google search. hopefully you're finding us through this podcast and the speaking that we're
Very good.
doing and
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's true. So this is maybe reveal more about our kind of business process, because I think that's also interesting to talk about. Yeah. So we have rewritten the Right Kit 3 times. We're on the 3rd version.
Hmm.
And that means different interfaces, different entities, different flows. And, as I mentioned earlier, my wife thinks I'm a little hard on myself. I don't know. I just think it's normal. But regardless, you wake up and you look at the thing, you show it to some people, and for anybody out there who's trying to launch their own SaaS, their own web business, it's a fascinating process. And it is definitely not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
What happens, and it's the strangest thing, you build this thing, you have this interface, it does what you think it's supposed to do, and then you start to show it to people. And immediately you start seeing it through their eyes.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing changes. It's very much like any creative endeavor, I suppose. But yeah. And then you realize the deficiencies and the oddness. And then you also discern where it's kind of different and kind of cool. Long story short is, we started this during COVID, really, is when it's like many people, we had these cycles where we were ideating and having extra time.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, to get to your specific question, so we have relaunched and we're now in a kind of cold start valley, if you will. We're kind of, we're starting to roll it out, and we don't want to go spend money on advertising. I think much like Liz has sort of created this framework for being authentic to who you are as a creative person, while at the same time marketing your book. And it's very much the philosophy that she and I use as software entrepreneurs, we're very true to who we are. And who we are is we just get a huge amount of joy out of working with authors, with just everyday authors. And so our current strategy is to actually go find authors individually who need the whole thing, who need the whole package. We bring them into the Right Kit. Right now, they're engaging us directly. So they're essentially hiring us as independent contractors for a fee, and then they get the Right Kit as sort of a bundle. Right.
Okay.
And that allows us to have very tight loop, very intimate interactions with them as they use. And I'm, we can talk about AI. I'm sure we will. Now that we've wired the whole production cycle into Claude Code, I'm able to bring up new features within sometimes minutes, directly related to experiences I'm watching with people. So that's where we are now. We fully expect to do a more conventional cycle with content marketing and seminars and eventually, running ads and all that. But we're trying to be organic about it.
Interesting.
We
Yeah,
productized ourselves.
Okay.
That's what we did.
So do you
we
guys have
productized ourselves.
anyone else, any other staff members or anyone else that helps out? Or Jesse, are you doing all the tech? Do you have any other staff members?
We have remote. Yeah, we definitely have remote resources, beautiful people who've helped us. Liz has a marketing associate whose name is also Liz. She lives in Nairobi. Maybe you can talk about Liz.
Yeah. Liz is great because she looked at at various countries in Africa, and she came up with a plan to help people in Africa tell their stories and market them using the Right Kit. And it was really amazing. I've been working with her for, I don't know, close to 10 years now. And it's just so amazing to hear some of the stories. I mean, that's where I'm really privileged, is I get to hear everybody's story, which is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing because life is not always great, but it's always great hearing other people's stories. It's really, really fun.
And I'd imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, well, yeah. So in terms of the tech stack work, when we started originally, I did use offshore resources. There's a fellow we work with from India, and he worked for a while. And then we had another developer also in Kenya. And then eventually we took kind of a hiatus between versions 2 and 3. And then we came back and we said, okay, let's do this. And then I found this just incredibly talented young man he was actually a Syrian refugee. And he lived in Istanbul. Very smart, very, very dedicated, wonderful man. And, my father was a refugee, a war refugee. much like him. So I had a real simpatico, and he helped me really understand and kind of get the basics going. But then, budget constraints, and then also just the fact that Claude Code really started, the first 2 or 3 months of this year. I can't believe it even hasn't been a year. I forced myself to sit with it and watch it break things and watch it fix things. And I've been lucky enough that I could intently watch the automated code generation. And now I'm at a point where it is just me doing stuff, which I got to tell you is not great. It's really hard because it's not, here's what you learn. It's like writing code seems really hard, and it kind of is. But what's really hard is thinking, having the right perspective, understanding, is this feature set make sense? Or what I really have problems with is this feature set being conveyed in a way that I want it to? Is it being seen as a valuable thing, or is it being seen as a burden and a white noise? And having another developer would be really handy for that. But, we're a startup, so we're doing the best we can.
No, it's definitely, especially from my experience as an engineer and being surrounded by engineers, we have a different mindset than the person who needs to use our software. It's a very different, completely different mindset depending on what software we're building. And I think almost every piece of software that I've been involved in my career has not been for engineers. It's been for business people trying to fill out expense reports, or salespeople at a pharmaceutical company. Has nothing to do with engineers. And so I could imagine that in wanting to bounce ideas off of someone, and you're just there by yourself. Yeah, I've been there. I can see that frustration. I do have a question about AI, but not from kind of like how you're using it, Jesse, but more, I thought recently, maybe a year ago, I'm not sure at this point, time flies by, there was a big uproar about AI is training, whether it's Anthropic, Google, or OpenAI, training their models on these books, people's books, for example. How are they getting, I mean, they're not getting the rights. So how are they using this as, what's your experience? Because now I find, I listen to Audible a lot, somewhat, and I could very easily go on to ChatGPT and say, hey, can you give me a summary of this book? And it has it. What?
But why would you want that? I mean, you'd want that if you were a student, but why else would you want it?
Well, for me, on some of the books that I listen to, so I don't so much read like, the Da Vinci Code anymore. I more read for learning how to be a better manager or leader or something like that. That is not, I'm reading for fun and get away from my world as it is right now. I'm trying to get information. So if I listen to the book, then I want kind of like this summary. Why I would want that. It's not, if I'm reading a book for fun, a fiction book, and it's a really fascinating story, getting a summary, you completely lost the whole experience.
Right.
I'm curious on your thoughts, your experience with AI now getting into, because you talked about digital rights earlier. How is AI a problem in getting into reading and absorbing these books?
I think AI is a problem at all. And I have some really good examples of it. But I think Anthropic is our best example. They did digest a lot of books, and then they didn't ask. There was no way they could have asked permission for it. There was no way. There isn't a union. There isn't a group of people they could have asked. So instead they asked forgiveness. And so now I can see that they digested, for example, my husband's book. They digested his book. And so now I fill out a claim and they give him $3,000 for the book. So they ask forgiveness instead of asking
They buy
permission.
forgiveness.
Yeah, they buy forgiveness. There's not that much you could do. I mean, the way I think of it is that and Jesse's heard this story like a billion times, but the way I think of it is when my grandparents lived in a tenement in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The tenement had just been wired for electricity, and they were afraid to touch the walls because they thought they would be electrocuted. So they only lived in the center of the room. I thought this was an apocryphal story, but then I looked it up and it was real. And so they only lived in the center of the room because they were scared of the technology. But then as life went on and they realized they weren't going to get electrocuted by touching the walls, they moved from the center of the room out and they enjoyed the entire space. So every piece of new technology is, I think of that. I think we're living we don't know how to use it yet, so we're scared. And we're going to live in the center of the room. And eventually we're going to figure it out and we'll be able to live in the whole room. And that makes sense to me. It may not make sense to anybody else, but it makes sense to me.
No, it's an interesting story. Sorry, Jess, you had to hear it for the 1 billion
Umpteenth time.
It's
But
always
for me,
good.
that's
It's always
is
great.
interesting in picturing that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's always great. Yeah, go ahead.
Jesse had, so somebody came to me, much like you asked if people Google us. Gentleman came to me and he said, SEO, I hear SEO is just dead now. It just doesn't matter. And really, how do I get ChatGPT or AI of any sort to recommend my book when people are looking at things? And I said, I don't know. Let's ask ChatGPT. So we went on ChatGPT
Exactly.
and we asked it, and it gave us a whole list of things to do. It was so happy that we were asking it, which is one of the big features of AI is it always makes you feel good, and it's like a puppy dog. It's like,
Yeah,
great
this is
question,
one of my
Liz.
Yeah, right.
one of my stock answers these days is there's no problem presented by AI that can't be solved with more AI. And it seems
Yeah.
to
And
be
it's
actually true.
But you
right?
have to be really careful. I mean, I'm not saying that it's the be all and end all, but yeah, because you do have to be careful of the prompts that you use, because what you think you're saying is not necessarily what it thinks it's hearing.
Right.
And I have a lot of examples of that. But
But I actually have something to say specifically about the SEO thing because we've all
mhm.
been reading about it and I've been thinking about it. And since we have a business, we have to really think about it.
Yeah.
I've come to the conclusion that the era of SEO is coming to a close, and that's just tough cookies. That's the way it goes. It's very much like the gold rush. I'm a Californian. Very much like the gold rush in the 1850s. There was a time when it was very easy to go up to the mountain and grab the gold, and then as time went on, it became very hard to get the gold. But there were still multi-billion-dollar gold mining and processing companies that did just fine with the gold. The same is true of the SEO. We lived in an era where it was ridiculously easy, comparatively speaking, ridiculously easy to rank fairly high in the SERP. But I guess I would say two things. One is, like I said, it's kind of over. And then the other one I'd say is that really the business you want to be in? Like you paid to fool people, right? So somehow your website appeared above the better link because you paid or you gamed the system, and so now you're trying to grab market share by fooling people. I personally don't think that's a good way to live.
So that I had another conversation, another guest that I'm going to have on a podcast. We talked about this very topic. It makes me think about, our education system. We know we're going to have this standardized test or this test that whatever. So we're going to make sure our students are doing well on this test, which may or may not actually help them to, learn, have more knowledge and be able to apply that and this kind of stuff. So, I think that's human nature to
Teaching to the test, yes. Teaching to the test is what we've done in our educational system for a good number of years now.
Yeah.
And much more effective thing to do is to teach people, especially now with AI and with a lot of other tools that we have available, is to teach people how to ask the right question. Because if you're not finding the answer, it's because you haven't asked the question correctly. There's no reason to memorize times tables anymore. I mean, it's probably good. It's probably a good exercise, like the way I do the spelling bee or connections in the New York Times. It's probably good for my brain, but it's really not that important. What's important is, can you phrase your question in a way that it can be answered. And that's a more important lesson, I think.
Yeah, I'm a big follower of Tony Robbins, and one of the things I believe it was him or someone in his orbit would say is, if you want better answers, you got to ask better questions.
100%.
Yeah.
And I have a 10-year-old, and sometimes he asks me a question, I answer it, and he goes, no, but that's not it. I go, I'm answering your question though. You mean this other question? That's going to get a different answer. I have another AI question for you. I've seen examples in the music industry where they use some software to just create a song, and it sounds pretty damn good. And I think for myself, who's not in the business, and I'm just going to listen to what's on the radio that's played over and over, and I go, oh, okay, that's a popular song. Are authors using AI? Is that a thing where some people are using that?
People will use AI to proof, which is to copy edit it.
Okay.
People will sometimes use it. It depends what you're talking about, really. I mean, you still have to write something, So if it's about information, let's say it's how I recently had to fix my microwave. If it's about the parts of a microwave, you're still going to have to put in the parts of the microwave, and you're still going to. But the thing that AI can't do, that only a writer can do, is a voice. Right? So it took me years to discover my voice. Now I know what my voice is. I could probably communicate it to AI, to ChatGPT or to Claude, and say exactly what the tone of my voice is, that there's humor in certain places, and there's, whatever it is. But I'd have to discover that first. And so it doesn't take away any of that. You're still going to have to write a million stories before you figure out what your voice is. And that's a satisfying thing.
Right. And
or write a million manuals,
Sure. So, okay, now I have some technical questions for you, Jesse. On the AI side, you're mentioning Claude Code. When I'm on YouTube, I see a ton of ads. Hey, let me show you how I use Claude Code. So how are you using that? How has that made life easier for you?
Yeah. So I have a couple very snappy, quick bullet points. Step 1, get a proper IDE. I use PHP Storm or VS Code. Step 2 is, if I can say this, man up and spend the money, level up and spend the 100 for the unlimited. You have to. And if you can't afford it, we've all been there, and that's okay. I'm not angry or I'm not trying to cast aspersions. Figure out a way you can spend the 100 a month on the unlimited. And then at that point, it took time for me. Well, I should back up. I switched from doing WordPress development many years ago to Laravel. And at Disney, that was one of the things I did. I helped transition our development team from WordPress development into a proper Laravel-driven environment. And so I kind of knew the basics, the kind of building blocks, the shapes of the Legos, I guess. So I was able to kind of watch it. The thing I learned very early on is, it looks like it's alive. It looks like it's thinking and doing, but it's not. It's language automation. And in fact, that's what I have come to call it. It's language automation. That's all it is. So I learned to not trust it, not in an emotional, cynical way, but just to kind of literally watch I don't go to full auto. I don't do that.
Okay.
That's, I think, rather ridiculous. But you watch the changes it makes, and you really keep an eye on your context window to make sure you're not overrunning it. I mean, as many people who are doing this understand, your context window, there's this sort of bell curve where as you prime your context window with a feature or with functionality, it gets better and it learns from itself and it gets really efficient.
Okay.
And then as you start to overrun your context window, it's starting to dump and compress things and getting rid of them. And as it does that, the resolution of its ability to make good decisions, or, what they used to call hallucinating, which is a stupid term, but it degrades. And so you're constantly keeping an eye on, like, where are we on the thing? And okay. And then you have to realize, all right, we're going to have to dump this context window and make a fresh one. And so you're kind of watching that, and you're watching the decisions it's making around the code. Look, I've worked at large scale environments. I've worked at kind of startups. I kind of have a slightly heretical view on this, which is that there's a lot of people who are incumbents who've made a lot of money as developers writing code for large companies. And it's this thing where they've been so overpaid for so long that they think that they're right. They think that they're better. And they're wrong. They're wrong. They're all going to get fired and they're going to get replaced. And I've just seen this happen too many times in different economic cycles. There was a time I remember hearing about the auto workers in Detroit, and in the 70s, they were getting paid $45 an hour, which, in the 70s was a lot of money, you know?
Yeah.
And then they just got rid of them. And then they figured out, no, you're not going to get to do that anymore. And what's going to start happening is the code people, how developers are, we get very tribal about, I'm a JavaScript person, I'm a Kotlin person. And that's ridiculous. All that's going away. We're very quickly going to get to a point where, first of all, I imagine that someone will start to invent a code, a source code format or a coding language that'll be optimized for language model production. Right, because it's kind of weird. I don't mean to overextend the answer here, but it's kind of a weird thing where I want to build a web app and I want to have functionality and get going and make some money. Do I really care if it's writing TypeScript or PHP or like C++? In fact, it doesn't matter to the value that gets created. And then the value that we talked about rewriting the Red Kit many times, learning how to fail quickly and coming back from it. That's what gives you success in the software business, is you have to rush towards the failure, keep a clear eye, keep a steady nerve, and then fix it and redeploy. And that's how you win. So it's a long way of me saying, hey, yeah, you know what? I've been doing Laravel and it's been great. And I was able to leverage that quite well for the Right Kit. But we're launching some companion apps, which we'll talk about some other time. And this morning I decided, you know what, this time I'm going to go Next and Supabase. And that's kind of what the kids are doing. They're all about Next.js and Supabase. And I'm like, all right, what do I care? I'm not going to sit and read all this JavaScript. I kind of understand it, but it doesn't matter. Even if it does some clunky coding, who cares? It'll fix it later, or it doesn't matter. And if you need it to, that's like real humans doing it, right? They write terrible code and it has to get rewritten and fixed. And then there's always that weird function that was embedded in your class that's been sitting there for 2 years that everyone knows is horrible and no one's gotten around to rewriting it. That happens with humans too. So, yeah, it has had a profound effect.
And if this didn't exist, you would need how many more people to kind of get done the same amount of work?
It's hard to say. Really hard to say.
Just on the coding side, or also on the?
Well, the coding side, the rapidity or the pace of coding really is driven by the sales cycle.
Okay.
I mean, at first it inhibits the sale, right? At first it holds back the sales cycle, but once you're in market, then the sales cycle actually determines your resourcing and your iteration. Probably 2 people, and to answer your question quite properly, you would need 1 tech lead / senior developer, and then 2 juniors. Would be what we would need. Yeah.
It's amazing. You mentioned something. It reminds me in 2019, I took some time off from work and I was like, I'm going to write an iPhone app. And as I was doing that, I was a software developer for most of my career, and I really wanted to do this. And as I was going through the process, I wanted to build something for myself, but I also wanted to, can I make money, any money through this? And the reality is, if I write it or I pay someone on some other part of this planet to do it for me, I don't make money by me writing it. I make money by having it done and getting users. Kind of speaking to, does it matter what the technology is, or does it matter that it's in the hands of the users that you're building this for?
100%
Absolutely.
agree. And this is where we are in our early journey. I am desperate. Liz hears me fetch every day about this. I am dying to get out of the IDE. I don't want to touch the thing anymore. But we are where we are, and we'll hit a critical mass where I can now hand it off to someone. This is there's a, as we all know, what's happening now in the software industry. You go to LinkedIn and it's nothing but green rings. Everywhere you look, it's green rings. There's a lot of people out there. And
Yeah.
long term, I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to bring someone on who can handle it, with the automation in a way that
Right.
keeps us going. But yeah, I don't want to do it. That's a really good point. You don't want to be in the business of writing code. You want to be in the business of delivering features.
Yep, absolutely. So getting back to less away from the tech side, where do you see the Right Kit 1 to 3 years from now? What's your vision?
I think that we will be every publisher in the world, in my dream, give this out to their authors as a tool to use so that they can market their own books.
Okay. I like that.
That's really this is sort of the thing, right? Where you want to sell it to a major publisher. The idea being that they can now help the individual authors can leverage their individual marketing output, which, as we know, is very hard. But also it gives them inspection across all their authors, all the genres, all the keywords. And now they can start to extract learnings that then they can now share downstream to the individual authors and say, hey, you know what? If you're a self-help author and you're talking about, living in New England and you use humor, we found that these keywords and these approaches tend to, work better for our roster. So that's look at everyone who launches a SaaS. Let's be honest. Everybody who launches a SaaS says, oh, we're going to white label it. And that's where we're going to really make the money. Look, I'm fully aware that's a very common pattern, but we've thought about this. Like from day one, this was kind of the intention.
All right. So as we're coming to a close, do you have any takeaways? Maybe it's for the author, maybe it's for a tech person, or any final thoughts? Maybe not a takeaway, just any final thoughts that you want to share.
Be brave.
Mhm.
Try everything. Be a whole artist and realize that when you're writing, that's only half the job, and that somebody else has to read it because something magical happens when somebody reads it. And visit us at the Right Kit. We'd love to chat with you.
Jesse, any final thoughts from you?
Well, writing is a spiritual process. That's something I've learned. The ability to convey your internal essence to other people is profoundly important. And in the world of AI, it's becoming evident, right, that what is intrinsically human, voice, perspective, point of view, very, very important. And in terms of any sort of technologists out there, be brave, but be curious. If you have to court curiosity, if some people are that way, it's almost like working out. You have to figure, if you don't feel you're as sufficiently curious, you need to look inside yourself and figure out why you're not curious. And oftentimes people are not curious because they're fearful. They're not ready for the answers that the curiosity will bring. And I'm here to tell you, do not be afraid.
Yeah, I think that's the spirit of the product. Don't be afraid. We're here for you.
Very good. And should people just go to therigtkit.com? Should they email you? What should they do?
Anything they want. They can go to therigtkit.com.
Go to therigtkit.com. Okay, we'll put that on the screen.
Or Liz at the Right Kit. I don't care. Any way you want to get in touch with us is fine.
Great. Hey, Liz, Jesse, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I wish you guys the best of luck, and I look forward to seeing how this develops in the future. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and click on the bell for notifications of upcoming episodes. If you want to contact the guest, check the description for the best way to contact them. But if you are interested in hiring nearshore software development contractors, or you are interested in using AI to improve any function of your business, you can go to the link right here to set up a meeting to discuss your needs.